Hi everyone, my name is Ben Upham. I am the author of The After Age, Why We Are Going to Be Okay and How You Can Help Us to Be Great. This video is one of a series of videos based on my book, and it is the third video in the series. I do recommend that you watch the first couple of videos, certainly the video immediately preceding this one. It's where I sort of introduce the ideas. I talk about what I'm trying to get what I hope you get out of the videos, specifically, basically change the way that you think about the world. Um, and I give some examples of the kind of thinking that I'm talking about that I want to get into your head. And then I talk a little bit more about this video. So anyway, you should definitely check out that video. If you want to read the book, there should be a link to purchase it in the show notes. Otherwise, be sure to subscribe so that you'll get notifications when new videos come out. Okay, so this video is where we really get into the nitty-gritty. I'm going to be introducing the idea of the after age, talking about what it's after. I'm going to be presenting you with some facts and information to bolster my argument. Stuff to think about. You don't have to necessarily agree with me, but you definitely want to get through this video before you proceed on to the rest of the videos, right? So this has, even though it's based on a chapter called The After Age, and the book is called The After Age, it's actually just the beginning. It's the foundation for everything else to come. There's a lot of good stuff to come, but you gotta get this one under your belt first before you can go on to the other stuff. All right. Today we live in the after age. Not all of us, not all the time, but more and more of us, more and more of the time. If you're watching this video, there's a good chance that you live in the after age too. So what is the after age? Well, it is after something, as aptly named, right? The after age is the era of human history after the primary challenges to human life, individual human life, I should say, have been overcome. These are challenges that dominated human existence for as long as there have been human beings, if not longer, but which in the last 200 or 300 years have slowly receded because of human intelligence and our hard work and our cooperation, and also a little bit of luck was tossed in there too. So what are these challenges? Well, you're familiar with them, or maybe not, because you live in the after age. They are getting enough food to eat, shelter and clothing, preventing ill health, probably familiar with that one at least sometimes, disease, things like that, accidents, and defending against war and violence, and freeing yourself from oppression of all kinds, political and social and cultural oppression. So I know what you're probably thinking right now, which is that we aren't after any of those things, right? So all you have to do is turn on the news or, look out your front door, and you could probably catch some examples to the contrary, right? Things that we're supposedly after, right? That I'm claiming that we're after. In fact, these things are probably in your own life as well, right? Whoever you are, and even if you live in the wealthiest country in the world, there's a good chance that some form of these problems, these struggles exist for you, whether it's a lack of food, or a lack of good health maybe, or a lack of justice in your life, right? These things continue. The after age is not a sudden transition, right? It's not an overnight thing. It's a gradual transition, like every historical transition. It been happening over hundreds of years. Hundreds of years is actually a very short period of time in the grand scheme of human history, but for individuals like you and me, it's a very long period of time. So it's not surprising that we don't notice it. The after age started around 1750 or so, give or take. People have written books about when exactly these things started to happen, but it took over 150 years for it to really spread around the world, so that everybody was experiencing it, and it's still not true everywhere or for everyone. The after age is not just an era in time or a geographic place, right? It's not some countries on a map. It is a standard of living whose boundaries are changing all the time. They're blurry, they're in flux, and they change from, you know, country to country and person to person and day to day. Nonetheless, this new reality is visible basically everywhere on Earth. And if you don't notice it, it's probably because you take it for granted, which is not surprising, totally understandable. But what I want you to do, at least during this video and afterwards, is to not take it for granted for a little while and to think about, like, you know, the immensity of what has occurred. It didn't occur in your lifetime. It occurred over the lifetimes of many, many people and your ancestors and people before them, right? But it did happen. So, you know, whether, you know, it's immediately apparent to you or not, it's a big deal. So let me give you some really high-level examples. A few examples, big examples of what I'm talking about. There are other places, other books, where you get a really good in-depth breakdown of the changes that have occurred over the last 200 or 300 years. But this is just sort of a high-level thing. So, for example, today is after the time when hunger and the daily struggle for just basic existence dominated human life. So for most of human history, just getting enough to eat, right, and making sure you don't die in the process, that made up most of our days. It's kind of like what we did, right? Except for a small number of people that basically lived off everybody else, okay? Today, for a growing majority of people, that is not the case. It just is not. That kind of immediate, I need to get food to live, how am I going to make it through the winter, whatever, that sort of fear is far removed from our lives. Some people, it's further removed than other people, but for a majority of human beings, it is removed from the immediate, right? There is no immediate fear of that. It is not true for everyone, unfortunately. But given our history, right? Given all the lives that have lived in the past and all the lives that have been cut short because of this demon of hunger and want, it's a miracle, really. It's shocking. It's amazing that it is true to the degree that it is. Okay, so another example of what I'm talking about. Today is after the 40-year cap on the average human life has been lifted, right? So what do I mean? Well, for most of human history, your average life expectancy at birth was about 40 years. And that was because, I mean, if you made it through childhood, you had a chance of living past 40, good shot at it, right? But so many people died in childhood that brought down the average, right? So not great. Well, that's not true anymore. You know, starting in the 19th century or so, it began to rise, and today the average human life expectancy around the world is about 72 years, so about double what it was. So that's pretty amazing, right? So here's another one. Today is after the threat of violence and war has receded from most lives. So this one you might have a lot of trouble buying. You know, if you, again, read the news or whatever, that doesn't seem to be the case, right? There seems to be a lot of mayhem going on in the world, but I hope, you know, you're a relatively thoughtful person, and you know that, like, what you get from the news and the perception of the world that you get from the news should be taken with a grain of salt at the very least. And more importantly, the urgency of the daily news or the hourly news or the minute by minute, like, Twitter stream of news or whatever, however you get your news, doesn't really capture the big picture or, like, bigger trends. And the bigger trend is that per capita violence has been going down, steadily with some ups and downs for a long time now. And by per capita violence, what I mean is like, what are the chances that you, average person, are likely to experience some form of violence, right? Are you likely to experience a war, or that you're murdered, or that you are badly beaten up, or all sorts of things like that? And that average has been going down. Now, it shoots way up when there's a world war or a war of any kind, right? And obviously, if we had a nuclear war tomorrow, it would completely ruin that trend, right? But until we do have a nuclear war, and knock on wood, we never will, the trend is going in the right direction. And finally, one more high-level example of what I'm talking about. Today is after the rule of law and not men is the dominant political power in most people's lives. So what do I mean by that? Well, just a basic fact. There was at one point there were 0 democracies in the world, and then there was one in the late 18th century. Right, that would be the U.S. of A., where I am sitting now. And today there is about 120, 118, 120, something around there, democracies in the world. So 60% of all countries are democratic, right? It is a fact that the quality of democracy in many places, including my own country, has gone down somewhat recently. But it is important that you recognize that a downward dip is not the same thing as a total collapse, right? So if I was picking stocks and I was looking at the democracy stock, I was like, oh, it was $1 back in 1776 or whatever, and now it's $118. Oh, but now it's dropped to 110. Like, I mean, what conclusion should I draw from that? That it's going to collapse, or that it's maybe part of a long-term trend that, with some ups and downs, that seems to be headed in the right direction? Well, that's your decision, obviously, but something to think about. Okay, and the fact is that even for non-democracies, right, the other 40% of nations, the democratic mode has been sneaking into these countries over time. What do I mean by that? So this is what I mean by the rule of law, right? So even in non-democracy, in dictatorships or authoritarian countries, not going to name names, but I think we can think of some. The fact is that these governments have been treating their people more and more like democracies treat their people over time. They are attempting the rule of law, meaning that instead of some freaking dictator, deciding your fate based on whatever he feels like that day, right? It is, the law, obviously, often, unevenly and poorly applied, but nonetheless an improvement. This means that there's less of things like torture or arbitrary execution or imprisonment or all kinds of coercion. There's still plenty, don't get me wrong, but it is definitely less common than it used to be. So those are just some examples of what I'm talking about when I am talking about us being after after the primary challenges to individual human life. Because again, I'm talking about the individual experience, and like, hey, I've been dropped into the 21st century. What's life like for me, rando human being, right? How am I going to be treated? How's life going to be for me? So the reality is that all around the world, poverty has gone down, however you define poverty. Life expectancy is up, living standards are up, violence is down, disease is down. So these trends are pretty powerful, right? Pretty unmistakable if you're like looking at the data, right? If I was the guy who got to go and present these stats to the CEO of the world, right? I'd be pretty psyched, right? Because I'd be like, I'm going to get a promotion for this, right? They're unmistakable. I'm not saying that hunger or poor health or oppression, injustice will ever have disappeared completely, or that they ever will disappear completely. But what I am saying is that the retreat of these demons over the last 200 or 300 years is so unmistakable, so dramatic that it must be acknowledged. It must be marked as a transition from one era to the other. So I call this transition, this new era, the After Age. But if you don't like that title, that's fine. You can call it something else. Or you don't have to call it anything at all, right? You just acknowledge it. It's here. It's happened. We're living in it. This is, great news, and also a challenge to us. How do we deal with this? What does this mean for how we live now? What does this mean for how we live in the future? When I say in the title of the book that we are going to be okay, it is because of all the facts that I've just presented to you and many, many more. We are going to be okay because by any reasonable standard, any comparison to the past, we already are okay. And more than okay for many people, right? But so many people don't believe that. They believe that we are headed for disaster or that we're already there. You may be one of those people. I am one of those people at least some of the time. So in the next video, I'm going to be addressing that fear and that state of mind, talking about where it comes from and how you can overcome it and why you should overcome it. I'm talking about you and your life. I'm talking about me and my life and my point of view. And I hope you will join me for that video. Be sure to subscribe below. And if you'd like to read the book, there's a link in the show notes. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.